E. Pope here, who's the Executive Director of Construction Business Services at Columbia University, who might ask you a couple of questions afterwards, Alfonso.
Oh, sure, sure. Not at all. Not a problem at all. So many people may not know this, but the governor created a team, an MWBE team. He issued an executive order in February, and that executive order created this team. This team is charged with concentrating on implementing strategies to remove barriers that MWBE firms have encountered in the past. So I'll give you a few examples. Some MWBE firms said, we have difficulty in contracting with the state because it's difficult for us to obtain a bond, right? If you're doing construction contracts, you have to obtain a bond to do that. So what we did is, through the MWBE team and with the governor's leadership, we ended up creating a surety bond program. So we can train MWBE firms about becoming bond ready and how do you obtain a bond, making sure that they become qualified to obtain bonds. And importantly, the state will support more than 30% of a state contract in order for you to obtain that bond. We estimate that this is going to be in excess of $200 million in additional bonding activity or capacity for MWBE firms. We also are working on creating, for the very first time in the history of the state, electronic monitoring and compliance system.
I was going to ask you about that. I remember you were looking for, you had a search going on. Has there been anyone put into that position to design that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I should have a product for you in the next few weeks.
Whoa, okay.
The idea is that you will, for the very first time, as opposed to going to 1,000 different websites to find out what contracts exist, what contracts may be available, you will now have the ability to just go to one website, get as much information as you like about how do I obtain certification from the state, how do I obtain recertification if certification expires, how do I learn about all of the construction contracts that may be pending with the state. If I'm interested in selling a product to the state, how do I propose to a specific state agency? If I want to get a list of all the procurement officers in the state to ask them questions, you'll have that information. So all of this will be posted for the very first time online. And our goal is to make it as easy as possible for minority and women-owned businesses to really engage in the contracting process with the state. And we're also focused on small businesses. In many instances, small businesses happen to be minority businesses, but that's not always the case. So we also want small businesses to have an opportunity to really do business with the state and, grow. Essentially, the goal here is to make sure that you participate, that you have the opportunity, and that you can grow.
And Tanya, I want you to kind of tune in here, but I have this one more question, and there'll be a couple of others while we can still have you here because you've done such a great job. I have to commend you. Everyone on that team and from the governor's office have really taken this very serious. But you have done a number of things since the year that we've been talking to each other. I've seen a great deal of development based on your initiative. We talk about the complexity of becoming certified, and I remember we were also talking about the ability to streamline, and this is something that I want Tanya to kind of hone into because she's really familiar with the city component of it. But has there been any movement in trying to demystify the certification process and creating a way to allow for it to be a little less difficult to do?
Absolutely. That was actually one of the first things we tackled. So we created a certification subcommittee to focus on, and this is being chaired by Keith Wright, and the certification subcommittee is really focused on making sure that we not only demystify the process, but we make it a lot easier for people to obtain certification. In the past, we heard a lot of complaints about a very complex system, a very complicated application process, delays in trying to obtain certification, and all of that is now a thing of the past. We have streamlined the application process so people can obtain certification. We know now, and we have implemented a procedure so that if you submit an application for certification and the application is complete, which is important, you have to submit everything that we're asking for because it's required by law. If you submit a complete application, you're guaranteed to get a response within 90 days and obtain certification. We've eliminated the backlog. We had thousands of firms that were sitting on the backlog with completed applications. We've completely eliminated that. We've also restructured the denial and appeal process to make it easier for people to get responses if they're not certified. Because one of the complaints as well is, a firm is not really owned by a minority or a woman, and they obtain certification and the advantages of certification. So we retooled the denial and appeal process and our sort of internal review process to make sure that only those firms that are actually MWBEs will be certified as MWBEs. That's just sort of a few things that we've done among many others in the certification realm.
Now, one of the things, and this has been kind of like an ongoing issue, which, and I think I know the answer, but just because a lot of people are listening to this, what came out of our last conversation, a number of people were saying, well, when you talk about MWBEs, and upping the amount of MWBEs, are you talking about people of color? Or are you talking about, and especially when you talk about women, is there a way to separate non-minority women or non-minorities? And because I think, and Tanya, you can help me with that. I think one of the concerns that had come up is that a lot of times when you talk about minority, you then find guys who are from England who having their wife, apply and they have a relationship and they become part of that mix. Has there been anything, and I know this is a little dicey, but has there been anything done to begin to understand the difference when we talk about minorities as it relates to the numbers and the idea of creating this type of mandate, allowing for those people who have justifiably not been put on to the listing of contracts and procurement to actually be there?
Yes, absolutely. Well, in terms of answering your question, I think the starting point has to be, when you create an MWBE program, similar to what we've done here in New York.
Right.
Starting point is looking to see where the disparity is.
Right.
So there was a study conducted in 2010, and the focus of the study was to determine who are the folks that are being denied opportunities in the state contracting process. Mm-hmm. And when they looked at the various groups, they identified women, regardless of race, as being a group that is being denied contracting opportunities based on their gender. And then you look at racial minorities, and we have a listing and a classification of race. So racial minorities in the U.S. are generally being denied contracting opportunities based on their race. Mm. So when we're looking at the opportunities that we're trying to provide to minority and women-owned businesses, we're really basing that on a disparity study and based on the law. So the law says you can create a minority and women-owned business enterprise program if you can demonstrate that there is a disparity in the contracting opportunities process, because you can't create a quota system. So we couldn't create a system that simply said, well, every 5 or 10th contract we enter into will go to a minority or women-owned business. Right. We can do that. But what we can do is, based on evidence that minorities and women are being denied contracting opportunities, we can create a program to incentivize them to participate and also ensure that the state agencies are participating.
Right.
We have the statistics. I mean, the statistics that were released in the past are publicly available, and they outline how many firms are minority classified and how many firms are women-owned that are classified.
Right.
And so, that information is certainly publicly available and people can obtain that. To your question about, a gentleman who's coming in from another country and having their wife, his or her wife, obtain certification.
That's politically correct, but go ahead.
It's absolutely accurate, and it should be. In New York, same-sex couples can marry just like anyone else.
That's true.
So someone obtains certification and their spouse obtains certification, and the question is, should they have the right to obtain that certification because of their gender, even though they are not a racial minority? The answer to that question is yes. because the studies and the data show that women have historically been denied contracting opportunities. Now, what we do know is that to the extent someone is seeking certification and they're simply listing their wife as the owner of the company,
right,
we actually engage in a very rigorous process to make sure that that person has ownership and control of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Can't simply just name someone in the certification application as being the owner of the company, and we accept that. We actually engage in a fair amount of due diligence to make sure that on the tax returns the person is listed as the owner of the company or has more than 51% ownership of the company. So with those internal controls, we're able to control and actually check to make sure that those that are applying for certification are indeed the ones that we're seeking to target.
Alfonso, this is Tanya Pope. I wanted to ask you a quick question in that vein. Does the certification process review also ensure that the woman who may be the majority owner, even if it's only 51% of that company, also have the requisite experience and resume to be the owner of a company of that sort? I mean, does the experience have to match up with the ownership as well to justify certifying a non-minority woman, let's say, as the owner of a company?
The answer to that is yes. And many people may not know this, but in order to obtain certification, one of the requirements under the law is that you have to be in business for a year. So theoretically, if you had a company in business for a year, operating under the control and ownership of a white man, and then that white man decides to shift ownership to a woman, in order to obtain certification, we're able to identify that.
Which answers a lot of questions, Alfonso. A lot of people have used that, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, but maybe even as an excuse, because the thought pattern is that that's not really real and this is what's going to happen. And one of the reasons why we have these programs, or why we decided to do this, is to begin to allow for people to understand that in many cases, all of the things that have, and some justifiably, has happened in the past, there is a tremendous effort, and from what you've just said, an accomplishment of creating a way to deal with these barriers and loopholes, which is something that I hope everyone hears. And one other thing that you said, and I think is really important for the listeners, if you are a minority-owned business and have been swayed away based on what people have said, the conference is also a good place to go. I mean, it's not just for MWBEs, it's for, certified MWBEs. It's for people who are interested in getting into the process.
Absolutely. And I'll just make 2 points on that. If you're interested in coming to this forum, and I really encourage all of your listeners, if they're interested in contracting with the state, or if they're interested in doing business with a prime contractor, what we've seen in many instances, you have a small business that is owned by a minority or woman, and they may not necessarily be interested in contracting with the state at that particular moment, but by coming to the conference, they have an opportunity to meet a large company in their industry, and there's an opportunity to network with that large company and actually do business with them. And also, tying back into the first point, those large businesses that we do work with are incentivized to hire minority and women-owned businesses, because the goal is to make sure that we diversify, right? Because we will not continue to do business with large companies if they are not meeting the goal, because we know that the numbers exist. Right? We know the MWBE firms in New York State far exceed the numbers that are actually hired to do work with state monies. Right? So what we want to make sure is that those firms take advantage of the opportunities and actually partner. You could enter into a joint venture with a prime contractor. You can enter into just an informal relationship with that prime contractor, or you can enter into a state contract with that prime contractor. All of these opportunities exist in a variety of industries. And what I want to make sure that people know is, if you don't participate in the process, we can't change the reality, which is we have billions of dollars to spend. We want to make sure that we diversify the contracting process for MWBEs to make sure that they participate. But if you don't participate, we can't change that.
Now, there are a number of state agencies that probably have never really taken seriously this whole issue of creating this opportunity for minority businesses. What has taken place to begin to assure that there is an inherent activity for all of the state agencies to comply to this 20% mandate?
Well, first, it's a 20% goal because it's really based on availability.
Goal, rather, yeah.
So it's based on availability. But to your question, what we've done is hold agencies accountable. And for the very first time in the history of the program, 30 years, this program has been in existence, 30 years. For the very first time, this governor has obtained 100% compliance from every single state agency and state authority.
Wow,
100%.
That is that's very impressive.
It's impressive for this. This governor is committed to making sure that we increase diversity in our contracting process. So for the very first time, this program has been in place for 30 years. So I understand that there may be some questions about whether or not this is real, and I understand that. But I can tell everyone on the phone that for the first time in 30 years, every single state agency, every single state authority has submitted a master goal plan as well as an annual goal plan update. And what that means is these agencies submit a plan telling us how they will get to 20%, outlining the ways in which they can achieve the 20% goal. That's never happened before, ever.
That's so important. As my dad used to say, you can't succeed without a plan. I had another question for you, Alfonso, because I've heard a lot about this. The revenue threshold that's been placed on MWBE certification. Can you talk about that a little bit and the thinking of why that was needed?
Sure. So before we came into office, there was a statute that was enacted, and it's referred to in most circles as the personal net worth statute. And essentially what it says is if you have a personal net worth in excess of $3.5 million, you can't really participate in the MWBE program. Now, having said that, there are a number of exceptions, right? There are certain things that you exclude from that process, so that is not really factored into the $3.5 million threshold. But the goal in enacting that statute, from what I understand, because it was done before we came into office,
right.
But from what I understand was in order to make sure that the program was narrowly tailored so that it wouldn't be subject to a challenge. And also, just speaking euphemistically, it's what you don't want is someone who has billions of dollars in revenue, but then they're taking advantage of the contracting opportunities that should be available to those that have been historically disadvantaged. So the one example we often hear is a small business shouldn't be participating with Oprah for a contract.
Right.
Right? Because ultimately the program exists to help those that are disadvantaged. And when we say disadvantage, we're looking both at race and gender, and we're applying a personal net worth threshold. And in some states it's different, right? In each state the thresholds are different. And in this state they enacted that, and that's what we're operating under. But that's essentially what was the rationale at the time.
And it excludes things like your primary residence and some other things that would, really tilt that number much higher.
Right. Certain investments you can exclude, your personal residence you can exclude. And so if companies are confused or if they have questions about that, they can certainly call us and we can help them walk through the statute if they have questions about, do I qualify? I think that I generated $2 million last year or $5 million last year. Do I qualify? We can certainly help them through that process.
Alfonso, I know your time is...
I was just about to say, Tony, I have to go.
I know you have to go. I just would like to, again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule for this interview. And one last thing, could you just let our listeners know where they should go to register? I know that we have some information here, but just and we'll probably talk about it afterwards, but just for you to give numbers and websites?
Sure. So the website is www.N as in new, Y as in York, S as in Sam or state, mwbeforum.org. Once again, www.nysmwbeforum.org. They can go to that website and register. And the conference, again, is October 25th, 26th, and 27th here in Albany. If they need more information, they can certainly go onto the website, and it has the entire calendar for the event. It has a lot of information, and we really want to make sure that people take advantage of this opportunity. We've spent a lot of time putting it together. We're hoping that MWBEs and small businesses take advantage of this.
Well, again, thank you, Alfonso. It's always a pleasure. And I know that sometimes when you Google, you get the wrong title, but you're the Deputy Secretary of Human Rights for the state of New York?
Well, almost. Deputy Secretary for Civil Rights.
Civil rights, okay.
Civil rights. So for essentially working to formulate civil rights policy for the state, and making sure that we advance the interests of all New Yorkers, and that's really the mandate that the governor has given me. And then one of the issues that I'm working on, and I should mention the governor's chief diversity officer, Iratia Dinzy Flores, who I work very closely with on this initiative as well.
Well, again, thank you, and we will see you in Albany, and we really appreciate your time and the effort that you've done.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully come back again at some point, okay?
Okay.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye. Again, we were talking to Alfonso David from the governor's office, the Deputy Secretary for Civil Rights for the state of New York, and the person in many cases who has had the oversight coming from the governor's office to make sure that all of these things that we've talked about are in place, which is a yeoman's task in itself. But again, you're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. I am here with Tanya Pope, who is the director of, and I always have to look at your title, the director of Construction Business Services. We're going to talk a little bit about that after the break, because many people, every time I have Laverta or you on, I get these questions about, well, why can't I drive this way, or what's happening? Why is it all boarded up over? I can't get the fairway because. So we're going to talk a little about the construction of Columbia University, which is going to probably take place many, many, many years after we are not here. I think it was a 30, 40 year?
It's a 30-year plan.
30-year plan?
We've exhausted 5 years, so got quite a few to go.
Got quite a few to go. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to take a short break, and we will be right back.
City College will host a free screening of the Academy Award-nominated film Barber of Birmingham on Wednesday, October 3rd at 6:30 p.m. at Aaron Davis Hall. This short film looks at the civil rights movement through the eyes of the late James Armstrong, an unsung hero of the civil rights movement. Armstrong, who carried the flag from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama on the Bloody Sunday Voting Rights March of 1965, covered the walls of his barbershop with memorabilia from the civil rights movement.
I got a lot of pictures of everybody in here that was doing something. When we started the struggle, I joined the struggle. I remember some terrible days. I thought about what Dr. King said. I've been to the mountaintop, and I look over and saw the promised land. I may not get there with you, but you will get to the promised land. Just keep on keeping on.
A panel discussion will follow the screening, moderated by Tony L. Griffin, director of the CCNY J. Max Bond Center on Design. Panelists include Assemblyman Keith Wright, the film's producer, Robin Friday, Abby Ginsberg, consulting producer on the film, Jerry Gaffio Watts, a leading critic of Afro-American literature at the Cooney Graduate Center, and CCNY film professor Andrea Weiss. That's a free screening of the film Barber of Birmingham on Wednesday, October 3rd at 6:30 p.m. at Aaron Davis Hall. Aaron Davis Hall is located at 135th Street and Convent Avenue.
On Saturday, October the 6th, Harlem Park to Park presents Harlem Harvest Festival from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on St. Nicholas Avenue between 116th and 117th Streets. Harlem Harvest Festival will offer samples from 15 to 20 Harlem restaurants, fresh vegetables for sale from New York farmers, wine for sale by local New York State wineries, cooking demonstrations, live music, fitness and yoga demonstrations, and pumpkin carving and face painting for children. That's Harlem Harvest Festival on Saturday, October the 6th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on St. Nicholas Avenue between 116th and 117th Street. This event is open to the public and there is a small admission fee.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
Hey, what's happening? Yo, what's up? Urbanology, yeah, the art of war with love and peace, yeah.
Okay, we're back, and I'm here with Tanya Pope, who is a person who has a lot of information. Now, there's an old saying is that if you're in a circle and you have the sharpest sword, you need to get into another circle because you won't learn anything like that, which is why I have the wisdom of begging both Tanya and Laverna to come and help me with this MWBE stuff, because obviously they have a lot more information about it than I do. And then when I talk to Laverna, she says, well, that's why I got Tanya, because everywhere I go, Tanya, your name precedes you.
Really? Wow.
Especially with the city, they were saying, well, Tanya, well, you need to get it from her. If you want some more information. Matter of fact, I had to send you a couple of more emails so you can send me some information. But tell us a little bit about what's happening now at Columbia.
Well, first I want to say I have a great love of helping minority and women businesses, so it really isn't, it's a labor of love,
Which is always a good thing to do.
Absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to mention, you talked about the street being closed and you can't get to Fairway. And this is an area that Laverna oversees, make a special effort each week to get a newsletter out to the community on our major construction
Is that
projects.
online also, or?
You can email projects, PROJX, at columbia.edu, and we will put you on the mailing list for any of the construction projects that are near your home or office or affect you. And you can see for the week coming exactly what work will be done, what streets will be closed, and what the plan is for that particular project.
What's that site again?
It's projects, no www, it's an email address, projects, PROJX, at columbia.edu, and just state the name of the project that you'd like the newsletter update for, whether it's Manhattanville or our Campbell Sports Facility, which is nearly completed. You can find out the latest news on that construction project.
And what's happening and all of that.
Absolutely. We want all of the community to know so they can best maneuver and be as little inconvenienced as possible. Yeah.
Now, a lot of your stuff is still underground, though, is that? Or are you beginning to come up above ground? I know that Laverna was saying that you had to do a lot of work underground in order to prepare for your above ground work.
Well, yeah, there were years of underground work, but I don't really want to speak on exactly where we are in the construction process because I don't want to get it wrong. What I would like to talk about, though, Tony, is some suggestions for MWBEs as they think about attending the forum.
That would be great.
you know, one of the things I've noticed about as I look at the schedule, you know, this conference was put on by DASNY for
Right.
years, and it's now become a statewide MWB.
Even though DASNY
forum.
is still doing what they do best as far as giving direction and a number of other things, because they have had the experience.
Absolutely. Michael Clay and Paul Williams are terrific, and they
And
know to
Carl
step
Wallace,
backward and forward.
who's really the person who's kind of behind the scenes but does much of the stuff.
Sure. But one of the things I noticed when I looked at the schedule is that there is a lot more opportunity outside of construction.
Which was one of the things that I had mentioned at one of the, we had a couple of sessions with Michael and Cara, and I was wondering, there are so many other opportunities, especially when you talk about the state, opportunities that if you're looking to start a business, if you could understand what is there when you're developing your business plan, even though it takes a year, at least you can begin to start shaping your long-term strategies to meet some of those goals and objectives of the state.
Absolutely. And again, if people go to that website, the www.nysmwbe forum, they'll see that there are seminars for financial services company, professional services companies, commodities companies, if you have a product that you want to sell to the state, really much broader than it had been for a long time. So I don't want people thinking, oh, well, that's for construction companies primarily.
Which is why I think in talking to a number of people from DASNY, Carl Wallace and the like, they were looking at rebranding this conference, because when for the last couple of years it has been basically predominantly construction.
Right, that's correct. And another thing that I would suggest to the MWBEs that are planning to attend the conference is to sit down with the schedule and plan which seminars you want to go to in advance. Determine who you want to meet and try to make sure you get out and meet those people. You know, that's why there's the word work in networking, because it's not always easy, but this is a really great opportunity. And, you know, planning, what's the 4 Ps? Planning prevents poor performance. So, you know, go up with a game plan, decide who it is you want to meet, the folks you want to talk to, what contracts